I could manipulate my emotions very quickly by eating certain types of foods and doing certain types of activities. Alcohol was very present. Narcotic use at times, promiscuity. I was living a bit of a double life. I hated who I was looking at because I started to realize I'm more afraid of staying this way than the idea of changing.
Welcome, Dai, to the podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Luke. I get so excited, I'm
No,
probably also too many
awesome.
coffees, but there we go.
No, awesome. It's glad to have you here. I'm excited to get into the show and get into your story and talk to you about everything that's been going on. So why don't you start us off, Dai? Tell us a bit about your childhood growing up and how you kind of started your addiction and where that kind of came from.
If I think back to it, up until about age 8, 9 years old, life was rather idyllic. And what I mean by that is, I had two great parents. They were together, both professionals. My father had his own business, that probably more to his detriment. He was, I would say the label workaholic would definitely apply. But he found a lot of value and fulfillment in his work. He was a veterinary practitioner, a doctor, an animal doctor, right? He just loved that. Him and a business partner started that business. So it was nice growing up with that because I saw that entrepreneurial spirit, that passion for doing something that really fulfills you, and on top of that, my mom was a professional. She was a nurse. And she always had a side hustle. Okay, always. Like my mom always had something going, right? And so it was cool, right? Like growing up and seeing that sort of dynamic. And my dad was an extreme introvert, where my mom was the opposite, an extreme extrovert. And things seemed great, And I had a brother that I still have my brother, of course, 2.5 years my junior. So my little brother, he's now a little bigger brother. He's like 6'4" and outweighs me by about 60 pounds. But as I say, he's my little bigger little brother. At age 9, everything sort of changed. And I think that relationship with change is a challenge for all of us. Like we get into sort of this groove or a flow in life and it just feels like, wow, things are great. I feel good. Got good friends. I got good relationships. My work or school's going great. Like we just feel like, if life could just stay like this, everything would be all right. But inevitably, and Buddha said it, 2,600 years ago, this idea of impermanence, right? Everything's in a constant state of change. And the more we are averse to that change, I find that more challenging change can be at times. Feeling like it might be something that we don't want, feel like a victim of it. And surely at age 9, that's what I did. I really felt like, whoa, this sucks, and I got nothing to do about it. I can't do anything about this. That sort of victim mentality, but also that helplessness. My parents, I remember it was like 3:00, 3:30. It was like after school on a weekday, coming back home and being like, whoa, my dad's here. Like dad was never home that early. It was usually 7, 8 o'clock at night at the end of the day. He might come home, tuck my brother and I in, and that was it, and he'd usually be gone in the morning before we even woke up. That was just his schedule. That was how he worked. But yet he was there. And so was my mom. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? This is weird, and of course, as soon as we get there, they're both sort of standing there rather solemnly, and they usher my brother and I in and sit us down in the living room. And my brother and I could just tell, it's like, there's something off here, And they proceeded to share that they were going to ultimately separate and get a divorce. And, I'm going to date myself a little bit here. I was born in 76. And so you can imagine at this age, it was like 1985, 86, sort of mid 80s. We didn't have an internet, like we do today. But also relationships back then, there was a lot of stigma and negative stigmatization of divorce. I remember my class of 30 some odd kids, there's only two other parents that were, two other kids that still had his original parents, two other kids that had already experienced, let's just say. I was one of two, right? Everybody were already in these sort of atypical relationships. You got your mom, your dad, and your kids, and boom, and that's just normal life. That was the normal. And all of a sudden I found myself not normal and not knowing how to express or deal with that. My parents, they were tough, man. They were in their own situation, both sort of broaching early 40s at that time, big life changes happening. Like now being 46, I can empathize with what they were going through, right? Being a father of an 18 and 20-year-old, two daughters now, I'm like, wow, that must have been really hard for them back then, and to navigate that with my brother and I too at that age. And so I have a lot more empathy and respect and sympathy, but back then I didn't. I was like, what about me? And I learned something, Luke. I learned something very quickly, that I had this angst in me, this anxiety, and I didn't know how to deal with it. As well as I started having these negative thoughts, thinking like, was it something I did? Maybe I could have done something differently. Like you're a kid and you just start thinking up all these possible doomsday situations, and the blame game really starts to take hold. And I learned something, and this was the moment. I learned very quickly, because my brother and I had a lot of autonomy at this point in time, because my mom was working, my dad was still working, they're trying to work through their own stuff, so it left my brother and I alone quite a bit. And I found that I could manipulate my emotions very quickly by eating certain types of foods and doing certain types of activities. The activities were video games, as well as movie watching, or TV watching, like that dopamine fix that we get from those situations, especially video game playing. But also on top of that, certain foods would create this emotional uplift for me. Like I'd feel really good, and in fact, feel great. And the rest of the world and everything, my entire situation just would no longer be in focus. So I'd find this little bit of reprieve from the stress, the overwhelm, the anxiety. But unfortunately, Luke, I wasn't sitting around saying, "Hey, Luke, pass me some more salad, please." It was like I'm there, and I'm just eating a lot of very calorie-rich food, but very nutrition poor, and that became my normal, along with the video games and movie watching for almost 6 years. I think you probably see where this is going. By age 15, the doctor, I remember my mom very clearly taking me to the doctor's office, because I was dealing with some asthma that was being brought on, but also I had some joint pains. Like basically, I was, dealing with a lot of these symptoms that were not usual for a 15-year-old. And, Dr. Quinn pulls my mom aside. He's like, Betty Ann, Dai is morbidly obese. His BMI is well in the 40s. Like, this is serious, and of course I'm just hearing this sort of just outside. Like, I mean, it's funny. They stood in the hallway, doors completely ajar. I'm in there in the doctor's office. I can totally hear everything's going on, right? And I'm like, I don't know what any of that meant, but I know that I don't like who I am. I don't like how I'm feeling. And it was just really hard. I had got to this state of unhealth, and it just sort of spiraled, and a lot of mental anguish came with that, a lot of depression, ideations of, wouldn't life be easier just not to wake up tomorrow? There was just a lot of that. And we hear about this all the time, especially in this space that you're very much involved with, Luke. We hear these conversations, we hear these patterns emerging, and life was hard. It was hard. I really isolated myself a lot, because I had this social anxiety. Every time I'd walk into a room, especially if people I didn't know, if people were already having a conversations, or they were, maybe laughing a little bit, I instantly believed that they were talking about me. They were judging me, laughing at me. I mean, they may not even recognize I came in the room, but that's just how I felt, and that's what I believed. So I started to avoid social settings, getting invited out to go to, say, a pool party in the summer. Hell no, I got to take my shirt off. There's no way in hell. I'm sick. I can't do that, and making up excuse after excuse not to do physical education classes, because there's no way I was changing in front of my peers. I mean, hello, no way, and so that was just the normal.
Yeah.
It was hard, and that's really where everything began, because I learned very quickly that there's certain things that we can do that provide us a great escape from the pain. It gives us a little bit of reprieve from whatever that mental or physical or spiritual angst that we're dealing with in the moment. You can push it off. You can set it aside for at least that period of reprise, right? Now, and we know it's temporary. We learn that very quickly. Hence, we come back and we do it again and again. Was I chasing a high? For sure I was. Call it a dopamine high, call it a sugar high, call it an escape high. that's what I was looking for. And that was sort of the normal until I made some changes, and, but we can sort of go from there. But anyways, before I sort of continue, I don't know your thoughts or you can relate to that, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
sort of where things began.
No, that makes perfect sense. And, you know, a lot of clients I work with, over 50% of them have had some kind of, their parents have been divorced or they've moved around a lot. You know, they've had challenging times when they're a kid, and divorce is something that has a big impact on kids, right? My parents, they
Yeah.
split up when I was like 8, 9, or 10, somewhere around that kind of
Okay.
age.
Same.
And then my mum sort of, you know, passed away. But
Mm,
the
same.
split up doesn't help, right? You know, when your
Yeah.
parents split up and you have to have, everyone says, you know, you get 2 Christmases, right? Of course, but obviously, as
All
a
right.
kid, you would trade both of those
Uh,
Christmases just to have your parents back together. So it's one of those
correct.
things, you know, all the benefits you get, they don't actually, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard being split between the two. And like you say, understanding or thinking, did I do something? Is it my fault? Am I in the way here somehow? And taking on a central responsibility. And as a kid, it's hard to make sense of those until you grow up and understand what's going on. So
That's
yeah, a
right.
lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, and I'm sure it's resonating with the audience. And also that
Wonderful.
sense of, you know, really turning to what coping mechanisms you had, whether that be food or
Yeah.
video games, and really indulging in those and overindulging in those, and starting to
Mm,
see the negative impact that that was having in your life. Like I say, as you put on more and more weight, having the being self-conscious and not being able to socialize and having more isolation, which leads to more
mm,
difficulties, and all of that was just building in you. So tell us a bit more about how that continued, or where life went as
mm.
you went into your kind of early 20s and your late teens.
Well, yeah. So here I am at 15-ish, like almost 15. I decided to, I had a moment, right? And it's interesting. So I'm Canadian, and if you haven't picked up on the accent yet, but like, uh, you know, in Canada, we have this tendency to apologize a lot. It's almost like it's a funny cliche, right? But we seem to always want to say sorry. And I know that at that time and at various periods of my life, it's interesting, but I felt like I was always having to apologize for my actions, but I would do it anyways. And that creates a lot of negative emotions as well, and just, I mean, it doesn't feel good because you don't feel like you're someone of integrity, for one thing, and you're not accountable. Right, and there comes a certain point where you don't stop trusting even yourself, right? And I know I got to a place of that despair, if you will, or as they say, the proverbial rock bottom. But even then, at the rock bottom, I was like, you know what? What's under this rock? I'm going to pick it up. I think I can crawl under this thing. And it was interesting, but those moments would give me more justification to chase the feeling. Like it's like, well, yeah, it's that. I guess in a way, a confirmation bias towards some of my beliefs of myself at that time, those self beliefs, right? And believing that, yeah, life sucks, but it's my fault. It sucks, and there's nothing I could do about it. So I'm going to eat, I'll play video games, I'll watch movies, and things came to a halt, though. At almost 15 years old, I remember very distinctly being at my father's one day, and I was in the bathroom, and I had this crazy hack, Luke. There was this thing I would do. I'd have to have a shower. And in the shower, a couple minutes before I would hop out, I would turn the water on quite hot, because what this would do is create a lot more steam and would create a lot of condensation on the mirror. So by the time I would get out of the shower to towel off, that mirror would be completely opaque, with the condensation. I wouldn't have to look at myself. Like these are the extremes through which I was living my life. Like something as seemingly simple as even just getting a family portrait, I would put up a stink and avoid it. There's very few images actually that exist of me today, of me during that period in my life. And here I was on this day and being rushed by my dad to get out, and I forgot to do my hack. So I got out of the shower. I'm toweling off into the peripheral of my view. I can see me. And I don't know why that day, because I would typically never look in the mirror. but I turned and locked gaze with myself. And then the most cathartic, sobbing, ugly cry of my life proceeded. And it was uncontrollable. It was just like this instant release and just, bleh, you know, like just tears, like Niagara Falls running down my face and onto my chest. Felt like I needed another towel, you know. And it was interesting, but I hated who I was looking at. Like I really did. But I also at that same time knew that everything that I was experiencing was my fault, you know, my choice. And I got to be perfectly frank. I had a vision of like, geez, I'm 15. What if life is never better than it is right now? And that scared the crap out of me. You know, the idea, because I started to realize, you know, I'm more afraid of staying this way than the idea of changing. You know, like, and it really was a fear-based decision. I, you know, got dressed, went and found my dad in the living room. And I'm like, Dad, I want to get healthy. I don't want to be like this anymore. And I remember holding my gut, right? Those rolls that were sitting there, just like, I don't want this anymore. I want to be healthy. I don't want to be like this, you
Yeah.
know, and he must have seen something in me like that motivation, right? Because this is the first time I said I wanted to make a change.
Yeah.
You know, so many people around me at that time during those years would see how unhappy I was and would always be offering, hey, have you thought of doing this? Why don't we go do this? You know, we'll go to the gym. I'll go to the gym with you. Or my mom, oh, I got a friend at work, you know, she being an RN, that's a dietitian, you know, she says she'd love to have a, you know, conversation with you, you know, and every time I heard that, as loving and as care, you know, as thoughtful as it was, every time I heard that, I was like, you think I need to change. You don't think
Yeah.
I'm good enough the way I am. Like, that's what I heard, right? Every single time, even though that's not what they were saying, that's what I was feeling. And
Yeah.
so I would act out and I would rebel and I would just, you know, just be very, very difficult. And
Yeah.
I'm I got a lot of love for my parents for what they must have put up with, you know, back then. And but here my dad saw it on my face. He's like, holy crap, Dai wants to make some changes. And you know, and first thing he says is, what would you like to do and how can I help? You know, so
Yeah.
kudos to
That's
my dad.
amazing. That's amazing and
Yeah,
very
I
supportive.
oh, I was well. I think he also recognized that window's open right now, a crack. I got to kick it open, you know,
Yeah.
and he did. And I said, you know, Dad, I remember when I was little, you know, like under 10, I used to love riding my bike. I was like, do you think we can go get me a bike, a mountain bike? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, when do you want to go? And I'm like whenever we can. He goes, well, why don't we leave now? And like literally, like we got in the car, we went to the bike store, got me a bike, you know, like, and we brought it home that afternoon and I went for a bike ride. No, it wasn't very far. It was like 3 blocks, right? But I went out and I moved my body with some
Yeah.
intentional purpose. And the intention was I want to get healthier. Well, every day I'd cycle a little bit further, you know, and one day I decided I got to figure out how to eat because I don't understand this nutrition thing. And clearly what I've been doing ain't working. So I'll go to the library. And I did on my bike with my backpack. And I got a bunch of books out on nutrition and fitness and lifestyle. And one of those books was like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, right? And some of these classics. And I remember you know, sharing the story with my kids. My kids are like, Dad, why don't you just Google it? I'm like, your dad's older than Google, you know, like, wow. And like, wow, are you older than TV too? And yeah, I'm like, you kids are in trouble, you know, there's no inheritance for you. But it was this sort of continuation, you know, of knowledge seeking. I recognized I needed to know things. I needed to know, what does it mean to be healthy? What does that look
Yeah.
like? What are the activities that are associated with helping people become healthy? And then I started looking around at people that I knew as well, and I would have conversations, inevitably asking for help, you know, and thankfully the people around me were willing to help. You know, there was a community there, and it's what allowed me to sustain it. And here's the little thing, and I'll sort of end it on this note before we sort of segue. You know, it took me 5, almost 6 years to get to that state of unhealth, to get to my largest. But when I made the decision to make some changes and I just started doing a little bit every day intentionally to realize those changes, within 20 months, I had released all that weight.
Oh wow.
So just over a year and a half. So again, about a quarter of the time it took me to take it off is what it took me to put it on, right? Like it was, and I think that's the reassuring part about change, is when we really do fully commit to the process of change and we get the right people around us. It's amazing how quickly change can start to happen. And I think there's a lot of people that have been through recovery and various programs can attest to that. When you go into it fully as a participant that's willing to accept, the support, it's amazing how quickly we can start to see some positive change, and I'm very thankful and grateful that I had that lesson early on, because
Yeah.
that's definitely been more present in different periods in my life as I've aged and experienced certain things. And but I got to tell you, and this is where the wheels on the bus sort of fall off, Luke, is as much as I made those changes, everything was focused on the extrinsic and on the external. I was focused only on my body. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my biggest motivations was I just want a girlfriend. Like, I want a
Yeah.
girlfriend. I want somebody that wants me. That was one of the biggest extrinsic motivations I had. And sure enough, by 17, I would started to get attention from certain groups. I started getting invited to parties. I started to get this attention and validation that obviously the changes I was making is what other people liked. So
Yeah.
sort of reinforcing some of those decisions. And but everything was focused on the outside, that perception that people have when they see me. And I would start to go to these parties, but I still felt like that little kid, that imposter syndrome. Like, I have the language to describe it now, but I would feel like, geez, why am I doing here? Like, people are going to find me out. They're going to figure it out that I probably shouldn't be here right now. I'm not like all of these other people. And so these constant voices are always in my mind and just really nipping at me. Right. And interestingly enough, I'm at a party and someone offered me a drink, and then another one. By about two drinks in, I was like, oh, hello. I don't hear those voices right now. In fact, I hear different voices in my mind. And those girls, I'm going to go talk to those girls. Oh, these people have that circle over there having a conversation. I'm going to go work my way into that, like I'll just see what happens. And I started engaging with people, and they were engaging with me and saying nice things, and girls were flirting. I was like, whoa, this is incredible, and I constantly would start to get invited to do other social things. And I was attaching that the person that they were really inviting was the guy that I was when I would drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that became the norm. That's who I believe people actually preferred being around and hanging out with and socializing with, was the drunk version of me. And that I learned at 17. And that was started a 15-year relationship with alcohol. And it also led to narcotic use at times, and also some other things I'm not proud of, promiscuity, but also doing things where my integrity was definitely questioned, doing things that I would never normally do. And to be fair, went against my values, but I did them, knowingly, um, especially when under the influence,
Yeah.
of alcohol or drugs. And and during my 20s, man, the crazy thing is, like, I moved from Toronto to Vancouver, so all the way across the country. Because when I graduated high school, I was like, peace out, I'm gone. Because I also loved the idea of having a fresh start where nobody knew me. And so made it out to Vancouver, started at university, found a job, started finding new social connections, really just getting an opportunity to reinvent myself. But again, alcohol was very present. I believe that I needed the alcohol to connect with people.
Yeah.
And this, it's interesting, but I met my wife, we started having kids, a business partner and I founded a company, and I was busy building that. Like, it was just all these things were happening, and everybody from the outside looking in just like, wow, Dad's got it together. Meanwhile, my evenings and especially my weekends were, well, a little bit of an Animal House, kind of film. I'm waiting for the Belushi brothers to show up and throw down, right? Like, this is just my normal. And it was really hard. It
Yeah.
was challenging, but anyways, I'll sort of park it there for a second so we
Yeah.
can, chat about it.
No, perfect, perfect. And in terms of, you know, the moving to different locations, right? That's a really important thing. A lot of people try and move to make a
Mhm.
change in their life. But there's a book, I believe it's by John Kabat-Zinn. I can't remember exactly who it's by, but it's called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it's a
Oh,
Buddhist book about meditation. It's really, really good. And the title always reminds me, and the book is about this as well, like wherever you go, there you are. No matter where you go in the world, you still have yourself there, right? So you
yeah.
can change location, you can change clothes, you can change on the outside, but you're still there on the inside. And I
Mm.
mean, for you, Dyer, when did you start to reflect on that inner world and change that inner world? What was that like for you?
Well, I didn't go to it willingly. I got to admit, like it was um, brought on more out of necessity and based on a situation that I found myself in at 32. Now, of course, during that period of time, lots of good things are happening in my life as well. And I have a lot of gratitude for people and places and opportunities that presented itself, but also at the same time, I was living a bit of a double life, but the interesting thing, and not to justify things, but to let people know I get it, I can empathize with their current situation, especially if they can relate to this story, is when you look at your social influence and your social connections, that network that you spend the most time with. I was just doing what was normal. I was doing what some of my business mentors had mentored me and what they modeled, because most of us, that's how we learn, through mentorship and modeling. And I found myself modeling their habits and behaviors, especially guys that were 20 years my senior, my initial first business mentor, 20 years older than me. That's a significant generation gap. And yet, his relationship with alcohol was much healthier, but mine wasn't. But it was still encouraged. He didn't really understand or know my background because I wasn't going to open up about that stuff, right? Like for fear of judgment or something even worse, like
Yeah,
maybe that'll get used against me. And
yeah. And also, yeah, vulnerability and business don't always go together. They should. They 100% should, but they don't always go
agree.
together. I know when I was running my
Yeah.
business, it was very much be strong, be, a businessman, have no emotions. It's just business,
Yeah.
make logical, reasonable
Yeah.
decisions and get stuff done, right? And, that doesn't always work, and it's
No.
important to have the vulnerability in business. But like you say, for you, your social circle was having a big impact.
Tremendous. Like again, it's just where I was and what I believed was normal and okay and just functional. Like I was, it was very functional. But on the flip side, I knew it created a lot of strain in my relationship with my wife. And also at times it made me feel just even disconnected to my own life. Especially like you'd have a great weekend, but I'd find that the next week, most of my productivity was out the window. Conversations weren't as connected. And I felt honestly a lot lower, because obviously now understanding the biology and what was going on in my body as well, and how that influenced my mental health in those days, I always felt like just these extreme lows like of depression, and my anxiety would feel almost worse after one of those big heavy weekends, especially if I was using narcotics like cocaine, right? Like that has an instant effect on our brain chemistry. And I was not willing to admit, oh, it must have been all the stuff I did on the weekends to make me feel this way. It was just like, nah, I'm dealing with some stress at work. There's this. Like I was always looking to externalize why I was feeling the way I was, rather than saying, hey, maybe it was what I decided to do on the weekend and put in my body that's actually making me feel this way. And I wasn't willing to accept that because that might mean I'd have to stop doing that or do less of it. And no way, that's not the culprit, you know. Um, and it's funny what we justify, right, when we're in those states. Like it's just, and I fought vehemently to try to prove that. And at 32 though, things really came to a halt, and it was sort of a progression over about 2 years. So between 30 to 32, my frequency of drinking increased, and also my promiscuity. I was, my wife and I at that point had been together for a decade. Both of our daughters were under the age of 6, just to give some context to the situation. So we had some history, but, she met me during the time when I was drinking, like it was always present for us. In fact, our eldest daughter, her name is Chardonnay. Okay. Just to put things into focus. All right. And my youngest daughter's Brie. So yes, Chardonnay and Brie. So if you're thinking wine and cheese, you are absolutely correct. Okay. Like this is, again, I am just letting you know, this is like where things were, right? Like we met and our first date was sharing a bottle of Chardonnay. So it had meaning to us, but this will give you an idea of sort of how things began with us, you know?
Yeah.
And again, that was normal. And I associated alcohol to why I was able to meet my wife and have this relationship, to have this connection. You know, it was the alcohol that allowed me to do that. So I would always believe. And at 32, though, you know, I came home after an all-night bender. I'm embarrassed to say, but I don't remember how I got home that night. And I remember waking up the next morning. It was almost noon. And I was face down on the carpet beside the bed. I wasn't in the bed, you know, and my wife and kids were already up. I could hear them downstairs, you know, in the kitchen mucking around. And I got up, you know, went to the bathroom, washed my face, and then I proceeded to go down to the kitchen to see my family, to see my wife. And I got down there and I could see this look on my wife's face. And it was disgust, but also I could just tell, like, there was something completely off, right? Like it was a gaze that I had not seen before in her. And it was almost like this disconnected look. Like it's just like, oh, it's you, whatever, you know, like it just like, and it was something I wasn't used to. You know, my wife has the ability that whenever she used to look at me, I knew that she was seeing in me the things in myself that I wasn't aware of. And she was very good at supporting and teasing that out of me, you know, and helping me be a better version of who I am. And I could see it in her eyes. It was like, I'm done, you know. And we sat down at the kitchen table and she proceeded to tell me, you know, we have to formulate a plan of how we're going to co-parent our kids because we're not doing this anymore. And she was that blunt. Like she's a redhead, tinge of ginge, and she's just like, you know, right to the point. There's no pussyfooting around stuff with my wife, you know, and that's one thing I love about her is her directness, you know, and also her kindness. And you know, tears started. Both of us were crying. Kids are in the living room watching Dora the Explorer or something, and it was just such a surreal scene. And you know, I'm pleading a bit, you know, I'm asking for another opportunity. I express that I want to make some changes, but you know, this is a conversation we must have had 100 times before. You know, she's just like, yeah, right. You know,
Yeah.
and because she'd always maintain, she's like, well, show me, don't tell me, show me. Right. Like, and she was fair to say that because my actions, as good as they'd be for months at a time, in a way I would justify, oh, it's okay for me to go out this weekend. Because look what I've done the last 3 months. I've been awesome. You know, I deserve this weekend out, right? And again, the negotiation all the time with myself of justifying my actions to myself. And she proceeded to ask me a question while we're sitting at the kitchen table that morning, you know, discussing what life is going to look like, us not being together anymore. And she said, Dai, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters?
Wow.
Yeah, I'll say it again. You know, like, Dai, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters? And I don't know what it was in that moment, Luke, but it was like this instant, just this visualization of somebody as me at that time showing up on my doorstep, wanting to get close to my wife and to my daughters. I mean, there's no way I would let them in the door.
Yeah.
However, that's what I was doing every day. It's how I was showing up. It's what I was modeling. And also I was mentoring through my actions or inaction to everybody around me. And I was telling my kids, this is what a dad is. This is what a husband is. This is what a brother is. This is what a business owner is. Like I'm showing them because I am that first representation of that. And it was like, whoa, you know what? I don't want to be that guy. I want to be somebody that I would love for my daughters one day to have in their life as a significant partner. I want to be that. I want to be the great man that I always believed I was growing up to be, you know, and like, because those values, that's what I was raised with, you know, but yet I was always doing things that was completely contradictory, which often would make me feel worse. And when I felt worse, I would drink more and do more drugs and do things to distract myself. So it was like this vicious cycle, as they refer, sort of frame it up to be. And it was in that moment that I made a commitment to my wife and my kids, but most importantly, made the commitment to myself to go 1 year without any alcohol, drugs, like just go 1 year sober, clean.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just trying people think, 1 year is not a big deal. Like, come on, man, you sound like you're an alcoholic. Like da 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 da. I've heard it all, and I'm just sharing. That's what I did, because the longest I'd done in those 15 years, from 17 to 32, the longest I'd done is like a sober January.
Yeah.
You know how we all have that New Year's, it's New Year. I'm going to start the year sober. I'm going to do 1 month clean, and of course, come Feb 1, I was always, let's go to the pub, like I did. It's celebration time. And so this was a 12x on top
Yeah.
of my long stint. And so I thought it was a fairly significant commitment. And, I asked for my wife to support me. And I let a few of my closest friends and colleagues know that this is a commitment I was making. I'm going a year just to move away from alcohol. I'm saying no to booze so I can say yes to the life that I've always wanted. And within about 6 weeks, I was like, holy crap, what have I done? Like, this is freaking hard. I had no idea how much of a crutch those habits had become. And I was struggling like big time. Like, I was depressed, but also at the same time dealing with these wicked bouts of anxiety. I was lashing out to people, which is not my normal, especially my wife, like the arguments we were having. And it was all me because of how I was feeling, and one night happened, and this is sort of where the first time in my life I truly was vulnerable. We were sitting down on the couch, and this is about, sort of in my second month of sobriety during this year. And I'm looking at my wife on the couch, and we're talking, and I don't know what it was in me, but I was trying to communicate what was going on internally. And I didn't have the language. I wasn't very good at articulating it. It was all just this balls of emotion, just literally balled up in me. And all of a sudden it just sort of came out. It must have been like a 40-minute tirade of me just going verbal diarrhea, as they say, right? Just like all over my wife on the couch, right? And I have to give it to my wife. She was a very generous listener, and she held space. She didn't say a thing. She would touch my leg, touch my hand. She just let me go. And it was the first time in our 10 years at that point that I'd truly been open with her and shared everything that I was feeling. Because that just wasn't something that I ever did, because it wasn't modeled by people I knew. I just, my dad was an extreme introvert. He was also, more of a stoic type of individual. He had his emotions in check all the time and would very rarely show them, and so that's just what I modeled. That's what I thought was normal. And here I was going completely against that normal and doing something completely new to me, but it felt good.
Yeah.
It felt release. And here's the thing, at the end of that conversation, she's looking at me and she says, thank you. It's going to be okay. I love you. We're going to get through this. But it was great. Those are all things I was very grateful to hear. And then she says, Dai, I think you should talk to somebody. And I laugh at this now. I mean, it's 15 years removed, right? But at the time, I'm like, what do you mean talk to somebody? I just talked to you, right? Like, I don't need to talk to anybody. And I had a really negative outlook and perspective on mental health advocates and psychologists. Like, I had a negative belief around those. It's like, I'm not crazy. I don't need to talk to those people. Like, just, again, 32, stupid, right? Naive and just very immature. And I was like, okay, maybe you're right. And I found a psychologist. Also found a relationships counselor. And just for anybody that's listening to this that can relate, you go to these counselors and or therapists. We went intentionally as a couple to work on our communication. And after our first session, she's looking at us on the couch and saying, Christy, Dai, I think it's better if Dai comes back on his own. So just to give you full context, right? And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll come back to the relationships counselor on my own too. And it was a 4 or 5 month journey, but I went all in on going inward.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like that was the first time in my life I'd done that. Again, remember at 15, I was just focused on the external and doing things outside of me. There's external motivations. I never done any of that internal work ever. Personal development, no. Professional development, yeah, because I could be the dude, I could be the man, I could be successful. You know, it fed my ego and that perception I wanted people to have of me. And I never at any point in time said, well, who do I want to be? And how am I showing up? You know, and so all of a sudden went all in with these professionals, which guided me on a journey of unpacking what I experienced as a kid. So I could reframe, repack, refocus, and really have a better understanding of what that experience was. But more importantly, also learn how to forgive that child in me, you know, that
Yeah.
morbidly obese kid that I was pulling along from you know, year to year and constantly feeling like I was feeling ashamed, you know, and
Yeah.
had a lot of blame. And I realized, you know, holy smokes, you know, it was cathartic, it was releasing, but at the same time, it was also just very healing. And we got to the end of that year. And this is where it's really interesting because, you know, my wife and I are having a conversation one night and she's like, holy crap, you did a year. And I'm like, holy crap, I did a year. You know, like we're both rather like, wow, that's amazing, you know? And I think my wife is really just trying to gauge, like, was I intending to drink again? You know, she's not supporting that I do or I don't. She was really letting me have my own decision. But, you know, we talked about, like, maybe we should celebrate. We could share some Chardonnay and watch the sunset tonight. And I was like, you know, that sounds great. It really does. It sounds lovely. And I don't think it'd be an issue because I was so different at this point. But then I looked at her and I was like, and Luke, I looked at her and I was like, you know, babe, so much has changed in the last 12 months. What do you think would happen if I kept going? She's like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, neither do I, but I kind of like to find out.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm coming up on 15 years. I'm in my 14th year right now, you know,
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, and it's just, it's become a lifestyle now, but literally everything just started to change in a really positive way.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I felt more connected to my own life. Now there were some hiccups along the way, of course, which we can chat about. But you know, like all my association had to change, and it changed because I just was struggling connecting with my old circles of influence and connections. Because again, you already knew what our normal was before that, and all of a sudden, I'm now completely abnormal to that normal,
Yeah.
and you know, not sure of my place anymore. And so, you know, it really kicked off this journey of rediscovering who I am, but also aligning with the things that bring me a lot of fulfillment, joy, and happiness, you know, very
Yeah.
intentionally.
Definitely.
And so that was sort of that window. That 1 year was extremely valuable to me in really setting the trajectory that I'm on today. Like you and I wouldn't be having this conversation had my wife not asked me that question almost 15 years ago, you know?
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Congratulations
Oh,
for
thanks,
making
Luke.
that change. And I think one thing that's important that you did, so many things, but one of the things on the front of my mind is you didn't say forever. You know, a lot of people get scared of
That's
this.
right.
Oh, forever, I'm never going to drink again.
Yeah.
You know, it can be really daunting. You're like, I'm just going to do 1 year. Whether people do 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, you know,
Yeah.
having that goal is really helpful. And just saying, I don't know what's going to happen after this year. Just going to do a year, then I'm going to decide where I go from there. That was really, really important. And also, Di, there was that sense of you had that realization when you got out of the shower that day when it used to be all foggy and it wasn't that day, and you snapped out of that denial and you were like, this is what I look like, I need to change. That was really important. Then you also had that moment again, like you say, when you woke up on the floor with your face in the carpet and came downstairs and saw your wife, and just realizing that moment something has to change. And
Mm.
the second time round, the important thing that I've really observed you do is, in some ways, is forcefully, but get in touch with your emotions, right? When you quit
Yeah.
drinking and you quit all those
Mm.
external things, you quit all the food, the sugar, the eating, the
Mm.
drinking, all those external vices, you were left with your emotions. And like you said, that was quite challenging to be like, fuck, how do I deal with these, right? I'm
Yeah.
lashing out at people, or I'm saying things like, what's going on? I've got all these emotions. I'm not drinking. That's awesome. But I still got these emotions. What happens now? And, you know, as men, we often kind of bottle that stuff up and don't really acknowledge.
Yes.
I know for me, I didn't acknowledge I had emotions. So you really acknowledge that, and like you say, had that verbal diarrhea with your wife, got
Yeah.
everything out there, which is really, really important. I had the same journey with a therapist. I went in, I was just like, blah, 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 this is everything from my life. This is it all, and just kind of all just came out. But that's like so powerful, right? And then
It is.
from there, you then started to get things under control and start to work on your emotions and have therapy and have couples therapy and really grow. And like you say, that's brought on so many amazing changes and
Mhm.
also challenges, but changes as well. And I mean, what advice would you give to yourself, Dai, to that version of you that was
Mm.
stuck in the drinking, in the madness, who was doing professional development, who was socializing and being a businessman and all that stuff? If you could go back and give him some advice, what advice would you give him?
You know, that being vulnerable is not a weakness. It is just a skill, and it's a skill every one of us can develop as human beings, and we are human beings that tend to be emotional at times, but we have to remember the emotions actually predicate being human.
Yeah,
We are sentient beings, we are feeling beings, and to deny the feelings, I'm a bit of a Trekkie, so to be a little bit like Spock, right? Like those Vulcans, and being able to turn off those emotions, sure, but that's just not it's not who we are as a species. Our DNA is by nature very resilient. I mean, we probably climate change experts would maintain that we're too resilient as a species. I mean, we are very good at consuming and expanding, but it's incredible to see these examples of people overcoming things. And now with the internet the way it is, and with the access of information and stories, it's incredible to see all these wonderful examples of change, because it's going to happen. It does.
yeah,
It's constantly happening, but to see it in a positive way. And so, for that version of me, it's really just trying to remind from a very empathetic and compassionate way that, listen, being vulnerable doesn't make you less than
yeah,
you are. And that's something I really want to hammer home, not just for who I was back then, but to let everybody know, especially men who identify as men, like that's who I am right now. So again, speaking from that perspective and that experience to this point, traditionally with most of the men that I've ever been connected with up until the last number of years, which again, based on intentionality of wanting to find new connections with different types of people, most of the men that I ever connected with, like vulnerability was something very taboo.
yeah,
It was not something that we share. And if we did, there was fear of it being used against us. Like there was a lot of these negative emotions to it. And I really think that that's where I'd love to see a paradigm shift for a lot of men, because I think once they do that, it actually makes them stronger than they
yeah,
were
definitely,
before. It really
definitely.
does. It really
Yeah.
does.
And it's
Yeah.
really, for me, powerful in relationships, right? It allows you,
Yeah.
especially in just heterosexual, so with me and my partner, she's a woman,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it allows her to get closer to me, right? And I
Yes.
always thought we were seeing as a weakness. She's going to think I'm weak. She's going to, abandon me. She's going to, throw me away. I'm going to be less than if I show this emotion and show this vulnerability. But it is the opposite in my experience, right? It makes me stronger,
Exactly.
more courageous. And I do manage my emotions and I take that into account. I have therapy and I journal and I meditate and do all of those amazing things. I do regulate my emotions, but to share them with my partner is so invaluable and brings us so much closer and is so much more fruitful, like I'm sure you found in your own journey.
Yes, absolutely. Like spot on, and it's still going on, right? The journey's still going on, but I think my one note for everybody listening, if this sort of is a state that you're looking to lean into, right, and really embracing this period of change, as tumultuous as it will be, because it will be, and especially when you're going through change, there's times where you can't see, your hand in front of your face, like you feel really overwhelmed, and it too shall pass, to sort of riff on more of Buddha. But this idea of change, it's just continuously embracing the fact that this is a process that's very natural,
Yeah,
but we can be a very much an active participant and not feel like a victim to it.
yeah,
And but it's examining that relationship with the idea of change and vulnerability, and of course looking at who's in our support network. These are all important factors to take note of or take an inventory of, because these will be very integral in helping you not only start the change process, but more importantly, maintain it and sustain it, because that is the hard part. Because I remember at 6 months in, even though I was going through all this great therapy and having these conversations with these doctors, I'm still left by myself most of the day in my own mind, with my own thoughts, my own feelings. And it was a roller coaster. Okay. Like there was days where I'm like, geez, is this worth it? Am I worth going through all this change? Like, is this really what I need or what I want? Like, it sucks. I don't like it. Like, and it is. It's like an internal war, right? Just constantly. And we hear about this, in the STEP programs as an example, with your sponsor and those conversations. Like you have these moments where you feel like, I'm going to lapse, I'm going to do the thing that I don't want to do. And it's amazing when you have a supportive person to connect with and to be vulnerable, to say, hey, you know what? I'm struggling right now. And then it's just, it's wonderful, because when you're on the receiving end of that, it's amazing. But also I've noticed, because I've been on the receiving end so much, especially the last 5 years, I've wanted now to be the one that can help others. And I think that's just part of that hero's journey we're all on. We get to a place where we achieve so much of this change, and we're like, you know what? Turn around, I look back at the starting line there where I was, 15 years ago. I'm like, there's still a bunch of people there. I want to help them. And I look at you, Luke, and that's exactly what you're doing, especially with this podcast, man. It's incredible, for us to be flies on the wall, to listen in on these stories and conversations and anecdotes. I mean, thank you, really thank you for creating this, because I think it's a necessity. But man, it's also a wonderful way to offset all the negative in the world,
And it's been an amazing conversation, Dai. Genuinely, it's been really amazing, really interesting to hear your story, and all the different stuff you've been through. And as we come towards the end, is there anything you wanted to leave the audience with, or leave us with, as we come towards an end?
This idea of change, right? It's interesting. I did a Vipassana, and if you're familiar with those, but a Vipassana, for those that are listening or may not be familiar, it's a 10-day silent retreat, where in essence you're trying to replicate what Siddhartha, or people like Siddhartha, like the ones that became the Buddha, right? The enlightened ones. They had this very hermit style. Let's just put it this way: you're living like a hermit, okay, like a monk for 10 days, and it's challenging, especially for someone that's just used to having a lot of luxuries around you. And what I mean by that is just like, working toilets and toilet paper and, some basics like bedding. If you're someone that's used to those things, it's going to be challenging, because for those 10 days, you're literally waking up at the crack of dawn, and you don't go in bed until after, the sun's gone down. But during that day, you're pretty much meditating the whole day. And the nice thing about these Vipassana centers, and they're all around the world, they're all volunteer driven. They don't cost any money to go to. But it's always, they ask for donations, because that's what keeps these things going. But all the people that come back and volunteer to run people through these 10-day Vipassanas are all people that have done one themselves. So they sort of have this, you do one, you serve on one, and it's really neat how it keeps this engine flowing, right? Revving. And, because I'm someone that's always struggled with meditation, sitting still, because I always found that voice in my mind was always just too loud. And I'd find sometimes when I'd sit down and be still, I felt like I gave that little voice a megaphone, like I was like, man, are they getting louder? I thought this is supposed to make it quieter. Right. And because you don't have any of those distractions. And so I always struggle. So I thought, I'm going to do this Vipassana. I want to learn to meditate. I want to learn how to still my mind, because I hear about all the good things of why it's a good idea. I want some of that. I went through the process, and it was life-changing, absolutely life-changing. All right. But the biggest thing I also took away from that, which is what I want to leave people with today, is, the instructor, I remember one night was lecturing, and they were talking about this idea of this too shall pass. And a lot of us, me especially, believe that was always in reference to the negative, that this too will pass. Don't worry. I know you're going through some challenges right now, but you can get through this. You will get through this. You'll come out the other side, and you'll be better. You'll be changed. You'll continue on. And so it's very optimistic, right? It's very, inspiring too, to believe that it's okay, I can get through this. But here's the thing, and this is what I found really valuable, was she said, when Buddha referenced that, he was actually more so referring to all the great things that happen in our lives. Those moments when we have that first amazing conversation with that person that might become our life partner, that day that our children are born or take their first step or say their first word, or that day you get that first big deal at work, right? Those too shall pass. Because it's a nice reminder that change is always happening. And these great moments, being present for those is actually that's where all the living happens, And so that's really what I want to leave, is like, as much as you think this too will pass, be really present for all the good things that are happening every day. Because as much as you're dealing with the struggles and all these hard changes, there's a lot of things worth celebrating and being grateful for. And so lock onto that, onto that.
Yeah. And I think that's such an amazing message. And it's so important when we think about emotions, right? When we stop drinking and using drugs and stop those external vices and those emotions come up, it can be really difficult. And really understanding that this too shall pass. The emotions are transient. They flow through us. It's okay for those emotions to pass by. You're not feeling the same anger in this moment as you were 2 weeks ago. And it's okay. It's okay to let those emotions pass through, the good and the bad. And like you say, to be present. So what an amazing message. And where can people find out more about you, Dai? How can they connect with you, learn more about the stuff you're doing?
Oh, thanks, Luke. I'm pretty active online, but most active on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So those are my three preferred channels. I'm very active on them. I always tell people, connect with me there. Shoot me a message, comment on something. Let's start a convo. I'd love to hear about what big changes you're working through or proud of right now, and because we're all just humans and we're all on this journey together, whether we like it or not, and so I find looking for those connections, it's what brings me a lot of fulfillment, as well as makes me feel more connected to the people around me, even if they're not directly. You might be through a screen, we might be in different countries like right now. Look at you and I connecting right now, right, Luke? Like we're across the pond. And I love that. And so Dai Manuel, if you can spell it right, you'll find me. I'm on every social platform. My name is very easy to find because I'm the only one with it. So do reach out. And thank you again, Luke. It was a real pleasure and an honor today. And I'm really excited to share this out with people, because what you're doing is so valuable, and it's amazing, because when we need it, I find that these things show up. And I'm looking forward to sharing this out, because I know there's people out there that when they discover it, they'll realize, I'm not alone in this journey. And there are people that understand me and get me. Right.
Yeah. And I think so much of what you said is going to resonate with our audience. And to everyone listening, I'm going to link all of the resources and the things Dai is mentioned, how you can connect with Dai on LinkedIn, all those places in the show notes. And we'll definitely have Dai back on the podcast at some point as well. Love to hear more about all the story. But thanks very much. Thanks for coming on the show, and it's been nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Luke. It's an absolute pleasure.